Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking. I'm Zakka Zacob. America and Iran have agreed to a 60-day ceasefire deal. As per the 14-point Memorandum of Understanding, Iran has agreed to dismantle its nuclear program. It's made a commitment not to pursue a nuclear weapon. And in return, America has agreed to give $300 billion in a war reconstruction fund. There's also an agreement to unfreeze about $24 billion of Iranian assets that are frozen around the world. And most importantly, Iran gets to export its number one source of revenue internationally, which is oil and gas, legitimately and legally for the next 60 days. So what has happened at the end of this 3 months of war? Who has won and who has lost? I'm now joined by a very special guest. Mr. Frederick H. Fleitz is the Vice Chair for the America First Policy Institute. Thank you very much, Mr. Fleitz, for speaking with us here on Frankly Speaking. What is your assessment of this 14-point Memorandum of Understanding between America and Iran? Who has won this war and who has won this negotiation, more importantly?
Well, it's an honor to be on your show. I think that this has been a huge win for the United States because President Trump has destroyed Iran's nuclear infrastructure. He has substantially undermined its military capabilities, its power projection capability, its ability to make missiles. Its Navy has been sunk. There's really no comparison from a previous deal struck by President Obama, the JCPOA in 2015. I might add that this $350 billion investment fund is not coming from the United States. That's not true. I know some of the media is saying that. It is a fund that I think will be provided by states in the Arabian Gulf region. But I will tell you that ending this war is hard because although Iran has lost, the extremists running the country refuse to admit that. And they would rather fight and frankly go down in flames before they would do the best for their people and stop the war and allow a process to rebuild the country. The Trump administration is working hard to try to find a way to negotiate with members of this regime who see reason. But it's hard because the Revolutionary Guard Corps seem to object to anything agreed to in private. But right now, I'm optimistic because the ceasefire is holding and negotiations are continuing.
So I'll get to each of those 14 points in a second, but I want to ask you, when the war was waged, when the war started on the 28th of February, President Trump outlined 3 or 4 major objectives for this war. One was regime change. That's not quite happened. 2, on the nuclear question, Iran has made no commitments for stopping further enrichment. They are constantly rebutting President Trump's claim and Vice President Vance's claims that there will be some kind of IAEA oversight for dismantling their nuclear program. The Iranians have completely dismantled that and said that they've not agreed to any such thing. Neither is it there in the word of the document, the 14-point Memorandum of Understanding. And the most important thing was that before the war began, the Strait of Hormuz was free and open. Today, you can call it service charge or fee or toll or it's semantics really. Iran really controls who and what passes through the strait. So have any of these objectives been met?
Look, the president was hoping that regime change would come out of this war, but the objective was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And he succeeded in that objective by destroying Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Another element was to stop Iran from assembling what would have essentially had been a missile shield that would have prevented the U.S. and its allies to attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure in the future. Iran's ability to make nuclear weapons, I think, has been set back at least 10 years, assuming it can rebuild its nuclear infrastructure and smuggle into the country the equipment it was using to prepare nuclear weapons. That's not going to happen for a long time, maybe 10 years at best if it could get this equipment in the country. So those are important objectives that the president did achieve. Concerning the Strait of Hormuz, it is not true that Iran is controlling the strait right now. It claims it is. The Iranian government lies all the time. They make these assertions. They are threatening ships that go through the strait. Ships are going through because the U.S. is protecting it. President Trump said he's not going to stand for tolls being exacted by Iran through the strait. But we will see how this will work out. It's a complication in ending the war, and I'm hoping we'll get a satisfactory outcome.
But on the Strait of Hormuz, admittedly by President Trump himself, more ships have crossed in the last week since this agreement was arrived at between America and Iran than perhaps in the last month.
Isn't that good?
So Iran then controls what passes through the strait, something that they were not doing before the war began.
We also know that President Trump said also a week ago that quite a few ships were getting through the strait by turning off their
transponders,
their shipping beacons, and the U.S. was escorting the ships. The Iranians weren't stopping these ships from getting through at all. The Iranian government likes bravado. They like making claims that simply aren't true, and ships are getting through right now. It's greatly reduced because the Iranian government is threatening them. But look, this is an unfinished problem, and I'm hoping that the administration will find a satisfactory outcome.
On the $300 billion reconstruction fund, it's called the War Reconstruction Fund, it literally says in this document that there will be a $300 billion war reconstruction fund. And to top that, the vice president, when he was in Geneva a few days ago, he said that the way he understands it, this money will be used to purchase American soybean and corn and other agricultural produce for good behavior by Iran. So there is a $300 billion war reconstruction fund.
I know that. I said that earlier. It's just not coming from the United States.
Why is Iran then buying American corn or soybean? Again, Galibaf, who is their chief negotiator, has disputed that. But that aside, this is what the vice president said.
There are several buckets of money that will be coming to the Iranians. There will be assets unfrozen. There will be a lifting of sanctions, which means Iran will be able to sell oil. It will be very difficult to have that revenue restricted in any way. I mean, I hope there's a way that we can force the Iranian government to spend those funds on the Iranian people to rebuild the country, but I think that will be difficult. Concerning this investment fund, I believe the objective is to get the states who are providing the money to put strings attached to make sure that these funds are spent on developing infrastructure, power facilities that may have been damaged, bridges, desalination plants. There can be strings attached to the reconstruction fund, and I think that's going to be the objective of the U.S. negotiators.
Can I ask you, I mean, this is a political question. President Trump faces, his party faces a crucial midterm election 6 months from now. How is he going to convince the American people that this war was necessary, the objectives of this war have been achieved, and most importantly, this deal that he's got into is better than the deal that President Obama got into 10 years ago without spilling blood?
Well, it's hard because the mainstream media is so biased against the president and won't give him credit for anything he's achieved. But the president admitted that there would be some pain for doing this. There would be a political price to pay. But he thought it was the right thing to do because he believed that an Iranian nuclear weapon was a threat to global security, not just to the Middle East, not just to Israel, but also to the United States. So the challenge right now is to end the war and to convince the American people that this was a worthy undertaking. I think it was, but I admit it's going to be a difficult thing to do because the media is so biased against the president.
Can you list out 3 points where you believe this deal is better than the Obama deal?
I mean, there's no comparison with the Obama deal. The Obama deal basically conceded a nuclear weapon to Iran. It was a very weak agreement that allowed Iran to continue to prepare its capability to enrich uranium, which is the way they're preparing nuclear weapons fuel. It had very weak verification. It gave huge amounts of money to the Iranians. It left its military intact. It was a joke of a deal that made the world less safe. Trump's approach has destroyed the Iranian military. It's destroyed its capabilities to back its terrorist proxies, to threaten states in the region. It still has a residual missile and drone force. We know that right now. But this regime is a shadow of the regime that existed before the 2026 Iran war. There's really no comparison between the two agreements.
What would you say to American allies in the Gulf whose military bases have been attacked, whose airports have been attacked, and whose fundamental security paradigm has been threatened in this war? And Iran has demonstrated that it can attack them almost at will.
You know what Iran showed these nations? It showed them that it had pre-positioned thousands, tens of thousands of missiles to attack its neighbors. This really was a revelation to the states in the region that Iran was a much more dangerous enemy than any of them had realized, that they can't sit on the fence anymore. One consequence of this war, I believe, will be a very strong anti-Iran alliance among the Arabian Gulf states. I hope that is under the rubric of the Abraham Accords. But the relationship between Iran and these neighboring states will never be the same because Iran chose to attack states that were not involved in the U.S. attacks on Iran. Iran basically shows that it is an enormous threat to its neighbors. And I think that is going to be something that these states really needed to understand.
Have Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu publicly sparred and expressed their differences of opinion?
Yes, there's been differences between Netanyahu and Trump. But look, this is a rock-solid relationship between the United States and Israel and between Trump and Netanyahu. Friends sometimes will disagree, especially at times of tension, at times of war. We're going to get past this. Trump and Netanyahu have disagreed before.
There were elections this week in New York, and admittedly it's a blue state, but three of the candidates who were vehemently anti-Israel and Israel's actions in Gaza and in Iran and the rest of the region won, and won big. What does that tell you about the mood of the American electorate, if you will?
I'm very concerned that the Democratic Party is embracing anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel. But more than that, these candidates were not just socialists, they were frankly communists. They represent a far left fringe that's gaining traction in some areas of our country that are democratic. I think it's a real threat to the Democratic Party. And if this continues, the Democratic Party is going to suffer catastrophic losses because the American people are not for socialism. They're not for communism. They're not for a party that hates the Jewish people. And I don't want to see this. I want to have two robust, responsible political parties in the United States that can have intelligent debates, not a party that is embracing socialism, a system that we all know just does not work.
I want to come to India-US. There have obviously been some concerns in the relationship over the last year or so, primarily on trade and tariffs. Just even this past week, we had the US trade representative here in India, and India is one of the large countries with whom America has still not finalized a trade agreement. What do you think is the holdup?
I understand progress is being made on that. Modi and Trump have a very good relationship. It's something that the president values. And I think that of the states in the world that Trump wants to promote better relations, better trade relations, a better security relationship to stand up to threats from China, India is at the top of that list.
So why then are they not able to conclude this deal?
Look, I don't know the status of that deal. My understanding is that we're making progress in resolving it.
There are also concerns about, India used to buy a lot of Russian oil. There were sanctions specifically on India for buying Russian oil, even though China buys a hell of a lot more Russian oil. And that's been a bit of a sore point in the relationship. How does one resolve that?
The United States wants to work with India to do something very important, and that's to end the war in Ukraine. And buying oil from Russia is funding that war. And this is a difficult thing to ask of a friend because we know that India needs its energy and the Russians are selling it cheap because they are under fire by so many other nations for conducting this awful war. The good news is that the Ukrainians are doing substantially better in this war right now. So I would, rather than dwell over this particular issue, I hope India will join the United States in putting as much pressure as possible on Vladimir Putin to end this war, which I think is a form of genocide to kill the Ukrainian people. If we could end that war, it would help the global economy. It would help global security. India's leadership could be really effective in helping us do that.
I'll get a final word from you. And again, this is 6 months before a crucial midterm election. There's a Pew Research survey that's out, the 2026 Global Attitude Survey. And President Trump has a median of 23% favorability with adults who are surveyed in this survey. How does he go to a midterm election with these kind of numbers?
Well, we're about 6 months out. We know that incumbent presidents have trouble holding the House of Representatives in an off-year election. But look, there's time for the president to come back. He's campaigning hard to remind the American people of his accomplishments, particularly in fighting crime, fighting massive illegal migration across our southern border, and keeping the world safe. So, I mean, I admit there's some polls right now that are not as positive as I like to see, but there's a lot of time for the president to catch up.
All right, Mr. Fleitz, we hope to have you back in November. We'll see if any of these predictions come true. Thank you very much, Frederick Fleitz, for joining us on Frankly Speaking. Thank you. So Britain's going through yet another political upheaval. The former Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who led the Labour Party to an unprecedented victory less than 2 years ago, has resigned, has stepped down as Prime Minister of Britain just earlier this week. The man who's expected to succeed him is Andy Burnham, who is a recently elected Member of Parliament. He's been Minister in previous Labour governments and for a very long time the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Will Mr. Burnham be able to solve Britain's myriad problems, whether it's the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, the immigration problem, or the NHS problem? Someone who's known Mr. Burnham for a number of years now is a close associate and a very well-known British cardiologist, author, and campaigner. Dr. Aseem Malhotra is now joining us here on Times Now. Thank you very much, Dr. Malhotra. I will come to the topic of health and COVID and all of that in just a moment, but because Mr. Burnham is in the news and because British politics is in the news right now, as someone who's known him for a number of years, why do you believe he's the best man suited to lead Britain at this given point of time?
Thanks for having me on, Zakka. So yes, I have known Andy for the best part of 20 years. Initially introduced to me by my late father, Dr. Kailash Chand Malhotra, who was the honorary vice president of the BMA when he passed away. And I would say almost certainly, and I'm sure Andy would agree with this, probably his most trusted health advisor. So, of course, there is personal bias here. But Zakka, I have spent, 15 years plus as a prominent campaigner where I have been involved in issues related to excess sugar consumption, poor diet, big pharma's excesses, where I have interacted with numerous politicians from all political parties. Given lectures in Parliament as well. And of all the people that I've met and I've known, in my view, Andy understands the root cause of the problem. He is a man that listens. And I'm actually, I tweeted this when he got elected as MP for Makerfield, essentially almost certainly going to be the next Prime Minister. It was one of the happiest days in the last 5 years of my life because I genuinely feel hope that Andy Burnham can turn things around for Britain and even have a knock-on impact in the rest of the world.
But some would say the problems that Britain is going through, and not just now, it's been going through for almost 10 years now, you can trace it all the way back to Brexit, whether it's the immigration problem, whether it's the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, and most infamously, and you know this better than any of us, the crisis in the health sector, in the NHS. Some would say, 6 prime ministers before him have tried and failed. Why would Mr. Burnham be successful? The problems are far bigger than the man. Sorry, that's
absolutely, Zach. You're absolutely right. That is the question to ask. Without understanding the root cause of a problem, any solutions you offer are going to be flawed. And the one thing that gave me more hope than anything else is Andy has, in his interviews, made it very clear, and I will explain why I agree with him on this from my own analysis. That the root cause, or a major root cause of the problems in the West, and I would even say that have affected, India as well, is neoliberalism. He said the last 40 years of neoliberal economic model has got us to where we are now, and it's failed, or it's certainly failing. And what does that mean? It really means that we've given too much power to big corporations who now really dominate our lives. They exploit information when it comes to our health. They don't give people fair wages. Okay, we talk about health cost of living crisis. And these are the real root causes of why people are unhappy and why their health is going the wrong direction. And if you haven't got a healthy population, Zakka, you don't have an economically productive one either. So everything for me, and certainly Andy understands this better than anyone, comes back to understanding what is the root cause of our health problems. And on a structural level, it is, in my view, the economic system that we're currently in.
Can I just press on that point a bit? Because some would say, as far as Britain in particular is concerned, the root cause of all its problems can be traced back to that disastrous decision of Brexit, of leaving the European conclave, as it were. And I'm yet to see a British politician who would come out, in the public domain and say, that was a mistake, let's go back to how Britain was pre-2016.
I think the problems were there before 2016, though, Zakka. I'll tell you on a health perspective. Since 2010, life expectancy in the UK has stalled, and now in many parts of the country is going the wrong direction. People are living in more chronic ill health. So the problems were already there and getting exacerbated before Brexit. There are pros and cons to the Brexit argument. One of the reasons that I personally would see an advantage of Brexit, and actually I think this played out in the pandemic, is that it gave Britain more sovereignty and less control over the big corporations who are influencing laws across Europe. For example, we never had the type of mandates when it came to the COVID vaccine that were implemented in other parts of Europe in the UK. There's a guy in Finland who I'm a key witness in a court case that's going to the European Court of Human Rights called Mika Vokala, who's a businessman who was refused entry into a cafeteria to have a cup of coffee because he didn't have a COVID vaccine pass. We never got to that level in the UK. And part of the reason even Jeremy Corbyn, who one would describe as, old school, traditional hard left, Jeremy Corbyn supported Brexit as well for that. One of those very reasons is to reduce that grip of corporate power over the United Kingdom that was spreading throughout Europe.
But one of the problems that's really come to the fore in the last 10 years, and certainly since COVID, since the last 5 years, is that the number of people who are immigrating to the UK from European countries has come down substantially, and the number of people who are immigrating to the UK from outside the EU has gone up substantially. And that's leading to huge problems with the existing population there in the UK, and that explains the rise of, let's say, a political party like Reform UK. I mean, if elections were to be held today, most opinion polls seem to suggest that Reform UK would win and Mr. Farage would become the next Prime Minister.
Well, I think 2 points to make there, Zakka. I think that these discussions need to be had. We can't sweep them under the carpet. We can't, just say that if somebody's raising concerns about immigration, that, use a straw man argument, they're automatically racist. I think it's about right type of immigration. It's about people coming in that are going to contribute to the country, contribute to society, with elements of compassion as well, because, of course, that often involves them bringing family members that may not be people that are, necessarily working towards, directly towards the economy. So we have to try and get the balance right. And that is a discussion that we need to keep having, for sure.
If I may, just before I come to the COVID-19 part, in your experience as the child of immigrants, how has that experience changed? Do you see perceptible changes around you in the conversation around immigration and lived experiences in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, Zakka, I grew up in Greater Manchester. And I, just to give context here, I experienced racism on a very regular basis as a child, to the point where I would feign illness as a child when my parents wanted to go out shopping in Greater Manchester on the weekend, because undoubtedly we would suffer some form of racial abuse, called Packy, for example. My dad was not shrinking violet, he was not the kind of guy that would just shy away, and he was always up for a confrontation if someone said something. So that would scare me. So I even got attacked by neo-Nazis once in the local park. Overt racism in that way has completely declined. I can't remember the last time somebody said something to me, even when there's been a disagreement, say, on the road when you're driving, which has been, used racially motivated terms. So I think there's been much progress on that front. I think structural racism is still a problem. We know that related to socioeconomics. We know, for example, during the COVID pandemic, people from ethnic minority backgrounds were more vulnerable to dying from COVID, in part related to socioeconomics, in part related to stress related to structural racism, which is still a problem. But I would say almost certainly, hand on heart, Zakka, I'm proud to call myself a British Indian. And if there was any country in Europe that I would choose to live as an immigrant, a second generation immigrant, if you like, it would still be United Kingdom.
All right, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective here on Times Now. Thank you.
Thank you, Zakka.